you have been writing about what motivates people who are now running institutions. And you've talked about it being faith-based. Specifically, you talk about the term the dialectical faith. So what is that?
Okay, it's the notion that there's a dialectical process, opposites, entities and things interacting with each other, which over time will let you achieve a society without oppression, provided those things which are getting in the way are excluded or repressed. So history has a direction. It's a dialectical process of the interaction. And at the end of that process, there is this golden utopian rainbow where there'll be no oppression. That's essentially the idea. It's something that, comes mostly out of Marx.
Well, we've talked about the public sector and the business world and what drives some of the people who are in charge of those institutions. And anyone who's listening or watching who's spent any time in these sectors will see very frequent references to human capital and to social capital. And within that, they'll generally see commitments to social justice ideals and programs. And in some of your writings recently, Lorenzo, you've coined a new term, dominion capital.
Yes.
So tell us what that is and why it's so bound up with the dialectical faith.
Okay, so the idea is that dominion capital is the combination of skills and connections, therefore human capital and social capital, because social capital is basically connections and human capital is basically skills. So the combination of human and social capital operating in networks to give people social leverage within and into institutions. So it's a structure that motivates and coordinates people to allow them to dominate others. And dominate institutions. That's why I call it dominion capital. It's about control. And it's about that combination of skills and networking, skills and connections to give yourself control. And you need a motivating structure, which is also a signaling structure, like the way you use language, what you approve of, what you don't approve of, and what is motivating you to come together in this way. So there needs to be signals and motivations to coordinate and drive you. And the dialectical faith with the notion that there's conflict between groups, that there's oppression everywhere. Everything's about structures of power. Everything's about structures of oppression. But if you coordinate and operate together, and repressive tolerance, you exclude all those who are either facilitating oppression or are allowing it to happen or are actively doing it. If you exclude all those, which of course delegitimizes everybody who's not part of your network, then you can, at the end of the day, create this wonderful utopian society where there is no oppression. So the dialectical faith generates both the language signals where we're all together, and also the motivation, the glorious future which we will create, and the sense of who's in and who's out. And of course, this can work as a layered thing. You can have a core group who are the full devoted people of the dialectical faith, but you can have a larger group around them who just buy into the various narratives, and they get coordinated in as well. They may not be entirely aware where all these things come from, and they're certainly not likely to be deeply steeped in the theory, but they've taken up the narratives, they've taken up the signals, and they are, effectively become part of the networks and connections. So you sort of get this sort of onion-like thing. There's a core, and there's groups going out who are using those social strategies because they're made available to them. But the core keeps generating the signals and the ideas and the narratives.
It sounds very, very Soviet Union, and it reminds me of that Václav Havel greengrocer parable where he talks about the greengrocer who puts workers of the world unite sign up in the window of his grocery store, not because he believes in it, but he knows at least the motivations of the greengrocer is he knows he needs to say it to stay safe and to continue having some kind of a living and not be harangued by the authorities. I suppose that's one such motivation for you being on the edges of the core, is go along with it because you get an easier life. And I suppose for some others, and I think this is probably going to be an argument you'll hear from lots of the conversation going on in the public domain now. Now, Christianity is being spoken about without it being dismissed, as everyone's taken on that Tom Holland narrative, which is the reason why we care about freedom, equality, compassion, all of those things, is that we're just so steeped in Christian ideals. And so even to the untrained ear, these ideological commitments and drives and spasms that we're all being impacted by sounds on first hearing to be quite reasonable, because if you are from a culture which prizes freedom, equality, compassion, then anything that uses words which are about liberating people, which are about equalizing outcomes because it's about fairness and because we don't want to tread on the downtrodden anymore, it's, well, why wouldn't we go along with it? And that's definitely an interesting wrinkle that people don't realize. But I also wonder how much, I think people in the core know this, and let's go back to that Solzhenitsyn quote of a society that is free is not equal, and one that is equal is not free, is those in the core might well know that ultimately they are trying to bring about an unfree society, because the world they want to bring into being, the utopian world you're talking about, is one which requires them to be the governors of it, the ones who can bring it into play, and they are uniquely disposed to be able to do it. Others aren't capable of doing it and perhaps don't understand the need to do it. And so, look, we're going to bring it into being, and whilst we're going to take these things away, this is for the good of everyone, including you, really.
Yeah.
Do you see the links there?
Yes. In fact, Horkheimer, the founder of critical theory, actually was very explicit about this in one of his later. Right, I'm quoting Max Horkheimer here. Marx did not see that freedom and justice are dialectical concepts. The more freedom, the less justice. The more justice, the less freedom. That is very, very explicit, right? That's not ambiguous at all. So Horkheimer absolutely sees it in this way. Yes, so, and very much that notion that people have to be stopped from saying bad things. They have to be stopped from thinking bad things. And when you said it was Soviet, it is Soviet, but there's an interesting and somewhat frightening difference, is that the Soviet model, of course, was the centrally directed party, the Bolshevik model of democratic centralism, as Lenin said. So he is the master of centrally directed party politics. This doesn't work like that. Not at all, the modern version. It's all networking. And there are, nodes in particular institutions and non-profits and academic departments and so forth. But it's fundamentally a networking process. It's not centrally directed in that, Bolshevik party Politburo. There's no Politburo equivalent somewhere. There's a sort of a shifting group of thinkers and activists who are in mutual communication. And that's why the signaling process and the language process is so important. They're not receiving, instructions from the central party headquarters, but it's this evolving structure of ideas and concepts. And what works for people gets selected for, and what doesn't work doesn't get selected for. And that over time actually makes it more powerful, because it's selected to get into the cracks, selected to get into the weaknesses, and then move those bits further in the direction of the social leverage and the benefits of the people playing the Dominion capital game. So yes, it is Soviet in a sense, but there's a really profound sense in which it's very un-Soviet because it's so networked and about mutual signaling rather than centrally directed.
I think this is where people get a bit black-pilled about the future of civilization. And I know John Gray, I wouldn't say he's well, actually, he probably is quite naturally black-pilled, but the political philosopher from my part of the world, the northeast of England, he believes this is why liberalism and liberal ideals are finished, because it's not like previous ideological capture of institutions, which is led from a top down. You know, there's a core elite that spreads it out and then imposes it on everyone. It's actually that there are so many people of different stripes and backgrounds and geographies without that top down institutional thing that brought it to the institutions in the first place, and everyone's taking it on voluntarily. And so then you see, if you spend any time anywhere in the corners of the internet, people saying, and I get this quite a lot as someone who hopes that there's something to restore from the ruins of civilization or the good cultural products of our civilizations, that it's just cope to talk about it if you were as if there was something to restore, because most people have just given up on it and they have taken on these new fancy ideas wholeheartedly and off their own volition.